This week in the conversation, I have the honor to receive from Ontario, Canada, a Canadian author, Paul Stuart. He's written a fantastic fantasy novel titled The Drowned Kingdom. But before we get into the video, I just want to remind everyone that it's important to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you do, don't forget to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, it'll go directly into your portable. So let's get started. Again, my name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this evening with an impeccable author, with P.L. Stuart out of Ontario. And today we're going to be talking about a very impressive novel, which is part of a saga called The Drowned Kingdom. So first of all, just to begin with, I have to say, Paul, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I am honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, would you please tell the viewers of CSMS Magazine who is P.L. Stuart?
Well, P.L. Stuart is a 52-year-old writer from a diverse background, a racialized background, who published his first novel at the age of 52, self-published. P.L. Stuart works in law enforcement. He is married to his lovely wife, Debbie, who is also his partner in this entrepreneurial journey. And between the two of us, we have 7 wonderful children, most of them grown. And yes, and I have a background. My degree is, I have a university degree with a major in English and a specialization in medieval literature, and a minor in history from York University in Toronto. Toronto born and raised. Now I live in a picturesque little town called Chatham, about 3 hours, 300 miles, 3 hours southwest of Toronto.
Wow, and you know what? When you say a picturesque town, I can picture it myself also in my mind, because I know writers always love to live where the atmosphere looks so enchanting. So I know. Is that the reason why that you move out of the big city into Chatham?
Well, a lot of reasons. I mean, the cost of living is fantastic out here. I love Toronto. Toronto, it's the epicenter of Canada, the big city. It's vibrant. It's got the nightlife and everything else going on, sports, entertainment. But I'm a bit older now, and again, you look for a quiet, as you said, especially as a writer, a quiet place to lay your head and to pen your books. And I think Chatham is a perfect environment. It's like a very welcoming community, and definitely has embraced me as a writer. So a lot of great support there. So yeah, I'm loving living out here.
Okay, so now let's get into The Drowned Kingdom. It is a beautiful fantasy story, fantasy novel. It's about a prince who's leading his subject out of exile, but he has to overcome so many difficulties, so many obstacles. And you, a prince, you have been empowered to show your subject that you are, in fact, can lead him out of danger. So the protagonist of the story is Arthur,
Yes.
and which reminds me, when I read the synopsis and I read the story, reminds me of Moses leading his subject out of slavery from Egypt. Okay, and the dramatic crossing across the ocean into the promised land. Is that what you had in mind when you sat down one day and figure out or drawing down the story?
Well, it's very astute of you that you noted that, Doctor. My background is definitely religious. I consider myself spiritual now at this age more than religious. But a lot of people have commented that that's one of the images they get about Arthur leading his people. However, Arthur, as certainly known Moses, he's quite the controversial character. He comes from a background of privilege. He has some very opinionated views. He's very bigoted. He is racist. He's homophobic. He is intolerant towards other religions. He comes from a monotheistic society where he believes his religion is the dominant religion that should rule over the universal world, just as he believes his people have ruled over the universal world and are at the pinnacle of society. So, like most princes and leaders at the upper echelon of a huge colonial power, he believes that his way is the right way. And
you know what? You say something extremely important, Paul, when you say colonial power. Basically, if there are colonies, there are also races, because colonies are based on the premise of supremacy.
yes,
So one group rules over another.
yes.
So when you say that, let me ask you a question. Have you also, before penning this story, have you read a lot about the colonial history of maybe the Caribbean or Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes, again, while my course of study in my major course study was English and medieval literature, my minor was history. I've always been fascinated with history, and yes, extensively I've read about all colonial powers. I'm fascinated with them, from Egypt to colonial and imperial Britain to imperial Rome. Colonies and colonialism fascinate me in that the viewpoint that one nation at times, tiny nations. It's so amazing that throughout history, tiny nations have grown into these massive, spread across the earth, into these massive empires, and they've subjugated much bigger nations eventually, and they've appropriated all this land. And typically, part and parcel of that, as you know, Doctor, is subjugating those different peoples and races and forcing their beliefs and religions on those places, right?
And basically, that's what happened throughout the 18th century.
Yes, exactly. And as the honorable Bishop Tutu said, to paraphrase, they brought the Bibles and then they left with the land, so they in a lot of cases it was Christianity. And if you think about the more modern context in the last a few hundred years, and that was the case with especially the Caribbean and Africa, where and again, colonialism is not confined to one particular country or race. I mean, it's a phenomenon that has been part of human existence for thousands of years. However, we think about the context of European colonialism and expansion. It was the people of color that were subjugated and had their lands taken, had their the Christian religion essentially forced on them. When you think about the indigenous people in Canada and the horrors that have been done to them in terms of their culture and almost an attempt to annihilate it, the residential schools that I'm sure you've heard about, recently in the news that in the last, and certainly that was in my lifetime. I mean, there is this history, unfortunately, with all of the advances in medicine and technology and literature, all these positive aspects, come these very negative aspects.
Right.
When it comes to colonialism. You can't separate the good from the bad, but the bad exists. And unfortunately,
on your trailer, which is it looks for apocalyptic, the way you design it, I'm going to ask you a question about the design of this. Who built this? Who really made this? But before I get to that now, anyone who's watching the trailer and who see etc., it's just like we're waiting. I mean, the whole world is crumbling down, but we're still waiting for either a Messiah or the great, my father used to say, Gwen San Salvador, to come and save the world. In this case, it's awful.
Yeah, and it's very much a lot of people initially, when they read the synopsis of my book and saw the trailer, they're like, are you against heathens? Are you against, are you and it's funny, and I very much wanted to convey, yes, definitely that sense of an apocalypse, a catastrophic event, a civilization. And if you, of course, those familiar with Plato's Tale of Atlantis, and that is that Plato, the famous philosopher, that's where we first heard of Atlantis from. I designed that society very much, certainly to a certain extent, based on Plato's Tale. I want to pay homage to Plato. Yes, there's a sense of an impending doom, and if you read Plato, Atlantis was this peerless society that was destroyed either through its own hubris or the gods or some combination thereof.
Right.
And then, but as far as people know, that was the ending. Well, I gave it somewhat of a further story that we were survivors, and these survivors took those values and wanted to bring them to a new world, to colonize a new world, and to take over a new world, led by this one person who was the embodiment of these ideals, these colonialist ideals, right? So
now let me ask you something. Fantasy and literature has a unique aspect of that. And every fantasy author I speak to, and every single one of them I interview here in this program, they always tell me at a very, very young age, they had developed such a passion for mystery, for fantasy writing. Was that what happened to you also, Paul?
Yes, I mean, when I was much younger, I started off in life, I always wanted to tell stories. I love telling stories, writing stories. When I was younger, my family was like, oh, you have a talent, you should really nurture that. And then it grew into, in various forms. By the time I got to high school, I actually did a cooperative program with a newspaper. And I did so well that they actually offered me a job, but I wanted to go to university and finish. But, and then, I had a busy lifestyle, raising a young family, being married, and growing up, I didn't have the time to devote, and I was in the headspace to devote that to writing. I did do various things, like write for volunteer organizations and things like that, magazines, but I never, but I had this seed germinating about a novel all the way, and, I kind of, wrote a bit of it here and there, but I never saw it to fruition. But then, later on in my late 40s, I was in the headspace, and it was time to get it done. You start thinking about your life, and you realize you have more time behind you than ahead, and you only have so much time to accomplish certain things. So, it's time to get started. So I did.
Now let me ask you something, because I know this is the beginning of the series, right? Okay, so this is book 1, which has just been published, and you are right now in the marketing campaign for the book, right?
Yes, and I'm working on book 2, and it is a 7-book series. But even after the 7 books, I have 2 sets.
There's a lot of story that I'm going to have to write.
I have 2 separate prequel trilogies planned after the 7 books. 2 separate 3 book series planned, and then I have another 7 books, the final 7 books to kind of wrap up, to pick up where the first 7 left, the end of the 7 left off. So 20 books altogether in this cycle.
Now I know you talk about we talk about many things, but the one thing I'd like to know from you, every writer is supposed to be an avid reader. So we read a lot, and even it says we're supposed to read more than we write. So who you would consider as your favorite writer?
I have so many. I don't think I can say one. There's writers who are big influences on me because I started reading them a while ago, and I've been reading them for a while now. So N.K. Jemisin obviously is a fantastic writer, multiple Hugo Nebula Award winner. She is pretty well the most decorated writer of her time in her genre, right? And being a Black woman and also being quite politically active. John Gwynne, another fantastic fantasy writer. He's now written a Norse-inspired book, Shadow of the Gods, which is amazing. Read it. George R. R. Martin, of course, The Song of Ice and Fire, and his whole universe. J.R. Tolkien, who if sometimes you don't like the word patriarchy, but is considered the patriarchy of modern high fantasy, if you will. But nowadays I read predominantly indie writers like myself, independent writers, and there's so many of those that I absolutely adore. I can go on like Bjorn Larson, Holly Tinsley.
Just one, Paul. One.
Just one.
Everybody says the same thing. There's so many of them. Just one. Can you come down to just one?
I'm going to say Martin, George R. R. Martin. And the reason why is because he's the first one since Tolkien to actually create something so massive in terms of appeal that it will never be forgotten, ever, right? Other than maybe, and all respect to Rowling, J.K. Rowling, I mean Harry Potter stuff, but she isn't one of my favorite authors. She's a great author, I know, but George R. R. Martin is I think he's the guy. And it would be Bernard Cornwell. They're close. Bernard Cornwell and Martin, they're really close, but it's hard to pick. Bernard Cornwell is the one I like to.
I know it's not easy. And
Martin's the one I want to kind of have that success. So
even if you were to ask me the same question, I would probably be in a very, very difficult position to answer because I read so many and I love so many also myself. So you still haven't told me. You have 4 more minutes in this conversation. The best cuisine that your wife, would cook and you would ultimately beg again for.
Oh, she makes pepper pot. So pepper pot, a Bajan dish where you start off with like a base. It might be curry goat, it might be oxtail, it might be whatever chicken, and you put sauces in. This one sauce called Castarique, and you put in the pot and you let simmer a slow cooker, and then you just keep adding on bits and pieces of this and bits and pieces of that.
American cuisine.
It's more of a Bajan thing, right? Barbados, but it is sumptuous. Yeah, all the flavor, the spices, and it's been marinating for days and days, and it's just yeah.
In college, I have a very good friend. Her name was Melinda, and she's from Barbados.
Yes.
We graduated together throughout our undergrad years. So we graduated together, and then we just drifted apart. But I know she's doing well. She lives in New York at the moment, and and she's a successful entrepreneur in Manhattan, New York. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It cool friends.
Right.
I love folks from the Caribbean because I am also someone from the Caribbean, and I'm passionate about Caribbean literature too. So yeah, because I know that for the same reason you're saying, it's a literature of resistance. If you take a look at all the mainstream writers from the Caribbean, either those from Martinique, from Guadeloupe, from St. Lucia, from Jamaica. You know, they all are has the element of resistance, and which is reflected in the writings too. And I think that's why a whole lot of people loved it.
Yeah. And the African American writers, of course, so many of them also, that same resistance, that same Peter Jelly Clark. I just read his book Ring Shout, which is, of course, it's fantasy. However, he turns members of the Ku Klux Klan into actual monsters, and I loved it, right? And that I think as racialized people, when we tell our stories, that element is always there. There's an undercurrent always there, even if it's not at those.
It's always.
It always goes to the surface, right? Even if it's not in your face, it's there. So
with that, I'm just gonna say it's been such a pleasure, Paul, to have you in the conversation.
Thank you so much, Doctor. It's been my honor to be here. Thank you.